The fireproof coating trusted by airlines, skyscrapers, and government bunkers started peeling like cheap wallpaper. That's not the end of the story. That's the spark. But before the panic, the resignations, and the congressional hearing, there was me, just Lauren. And I never even raised my voice. My name is Lauren Blake. For 23 years, I arrived at Vanguard Coatings at precisely 7:43 a.m. Not because anyone demanded it, but because the morning light through the laboratory windows was perfect at that hour. Perfect for seeing what others couldn't. I wasn't what you'd call memorable. Medium height, brown hair usually pulled back in a practical bun, glasses that slid down my nose when I concentrated. I wore the same style of navy slacks and button-ups in rotation, with sensible shoes that could withstand 12-hour days on concrete floors. People who passed me in hallways often didn't recognize me outside the lab, even after years of working together. That suited me fine. I wasn't there to be seen. I was there to see, to observe the molecular dance that created VX9, the miracle coating that wouldn't burn even when everything else did. I never intended to become indispensable. It happened gradually, like most important things do. First, I was the junior chemist who stayed late reviewing test results. Then the engineer who noticed the microscopic bubbling that preceded failure. Eventually, I became the only person who could feel when a batch was wrong by the way it moved against a stirring rod. They called me the materials witch when they thought I couldn't hear. It wasn't meant unkindly, just acknowledgement that what I did transcended the parameters in our technical manuals. I could smell a 0.03% variation in the silicate compound. I could see, in the way light refracted through a sample, whether it would maintain integrity at 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. I never wrote down the complete formula, not because of some dramatic sense of self-importance, but because VX9 wasn't just a list of ingredients and procedures. It was timing, intuition, adjustments made based on ambient humidity and the subtle variations in raw materials that technically met specs but behaved differently in combination. The irony? I was never officially the head of R&D. My business card read Senior Materials Engineer. My salary was respectable, but not exceptional. I had no corner office, no executive parking spot, just a lab that became an extension of myself and the quiet knowledge that what I created protected people who would never know my name. For 23 years, that was enough. Until Vanguard Coatings merged with Hercules Industrial. The acquisition announcement came on a Tuesday morning, glossy press release speaking of synergies and market consolidation. What it didn't mention was the caravan of luxury SUVs that would arrive from Boston the following Monday, carrying men and women in tailored suits who walked through our facilities with the detached curiosity of tourists at a museum. Leading them was Preston Hale, 38 years old and newly appointed CEO of the merged entity. He had a Harvard MBA, a smile that appeared precisely calibrated, and a habit of tapping his watch whenever conversations exceeded his predetermined timeframe. Lauren Blake, he said when we were introduced, pronouncing my name like he was reading it phonetically. The VX9 specialist. Fascinating work. We should have lunch sometime. We never did. Instead, the corporate communications began arriving in methodical waves. First came the emails about efficiency initiatives and departmental restructuring, then the mandatory workshops on innovation through disruption and embracing generational transitions. Elena Moore, my lab assistant for the past 8 years, noticed it first. They're replacing the old guard, she said one evening, both of us hunched over microscopes. Jackson in procurement, Maria in quality control, all pushed into early retirement last week. I adjusted the focus knob. I'm not retirement age. No, Elena agreed, but you're what they call legacy infrastructure. I smiled at that. There were worse things to be called. The rumors started a month later. Whispers about a next-generation VX9 that would maintain effectiveness while reducing production costs by 30%. Impossible, of course. We'd spent decades refining the formula, testing hundreds of variations. The current composition represented a perfect balance between efficacy and manufacturability. Still, I didn't worry until the day I arrived to find my keycard access to the materials database temporarily deactivated due to system updates. The IT department apologized profusely. A glitch, they said. But when I returned to my lab, I noticed something. The ventilation system had been running at a different setting. Microscopic but unmistakable particles of a new compound dusted the counter near my station. Someone had been experimenting in my lab. I said nothing. Instead, I began arriving earlier, staying later. I kept one sample from each VX9 batch we produced, labeled with innocuous codes that meant nothing to anyone but me. I documented minor variations in the manufacturing process, nothing that would compromise quality, but adjustments that would confuse anyone trying to reverse engineer the exact methodology. And I waited. The meeting invitation appeared in my calendar on a Thursday morning. Personnel discussion, 3 p.m., conference room 7B. No agenda attached. I knew before I walked in. Preston Hale sat at the head of the table, flanked by Kimberly Saxon from HR and a young man I'd never seen before. "Lauren," Preston began, hands folded precisely on the table. "First, let me say that your contributions to Vanguard have been nothing short of extraordinary." I noticed he already referred to the company in the past tense, as if the old Vanguard had already ceased to exist. "As we align our organizational structure with our forward-looking strategic objectives," he continued, "we've made the difficult decision to streamline certain positions." Kimberly slid a folder across the table. "Your severance package is quite generous. 2 years of salary, extended health benefits, and of course, your pension remains intact." I didn't open the folder. Instead, I looked at the young man who hadn't spoken yet. He shifted uncomfortably under my gaze. "This is Derek Sloan," Preston said, following my line of sight. "He'll be taking over material development for our protection systems division. Yale graduate, specialized in polymer chemistry, brilliant young mind." Derek attempted a smile. "It's an honor to build on your work, Ms. Blake. I've studied the VX9 patent filings extensively." I almost laughed at that. The patent filings contained the broad strokes, of course, enough to protect intellectual property without revealing the soul of the formula. "I assume there will be a transition period," I said. "The VX9 production schedule—" "Actually," Preston interrupted, "we feel a clean break is best for all parties. Today will be your last day." I nodded, more to myself than to them. So, that's how it would be. "The files on your system have been backed up," Kimberly added, "and we'll need your keycard and company phone before you leave." I removed both items from my pocket and placed them on the table. "Is there anything else you need from me?" I asked. Preston and Kimberly exchanged glances. "Well," Preston said carefully, "if there's any undocumented information about the VX9 production process that would be helpful for Derek. Everything relevant is in the technical specifications." I replied. A perfect truth. What was relevant and what was essential were not necessarily the same thing. They walked me to my office, watched as I packed my few personal items into a cardboard box. Family photos. A coffee mug my nephew had painted. A small glass paperweight containing a perfect VX9 sample, my first successful batch. As I lifted the box, Derek cleared his throat. "Ms. Blake, if you don't mind, could I ask just one question about the curing process for the intermediate layer?" I looked at him, this ambitious young man who had no idea what he was stepping into. "Good luck, Derek," I said simply, and walked out of Vanguard Coatings for the last time. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but what happened next wasn't revenge. It was simply physics and chemistry following their immutable laws, like water flowing downhill or fire consuming oxygen. From my small rental cabin in the Colorado mountains, I followed the news. At first, there was nothing. Then, 3 weeks after my departure, a small item in an industry newsletter. Minor delays in Vanguard Coatings deliveries due to quality control enhancements. I knew what that meant. A week later, my phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. "Lauren, it's Elena." I smiled, settling into the porch chair overlooking the pine forest. "How's the lab?" A long pause. It's chaotic. Derek found your Excel file. I chuckled softly. I'd left exactly one file on my computer, a spreadsheet titled Good Luck Kid XELSX, containing columns of numbers that looked meaningful but were actually the first 1,000 digits of pi, e, and the Fibonacci sequence. He's been trying to recreate your process. Elena continued. They've brought in consultants, even an AI system to analyze historical production data. They're calling it VX9 Enhanced now. How's it performing? I asked, though I already knew. Initial tests looked promising, she admitted, but they rushed it into production without extended environmental testing. Of course they did. Preston Hale wasn't the type to wait when there were quarterly targets to hit. Lauren, Elena's voice dropped to a whisper. There's something else. The first installation of the new formula, at the Federal Reserve Data Center in Virginia, the coding started to bubble after just 2 weeks of HVAC cycling. I closed my eyes. Not unexpected, but disappointing nonetheless. VX9 wasn't just a fire retardant, it was a complex system that had to withstand thermal cycling, moisture, UV exposure, and the microvibrations of large structures. The formula I'd perfected accounted for all these factors. Anyone hurt? I asked. No, but they've halted all shipments for government contracts. Derek's team is working around the clock trying to figure out what went wrong. I said nothing. They're saying you sabotaged the documentation, Elena added quietly. That you deliberately withheld critical information. Now that stung. 23 years of meticulous work, of obsessive attention to quality, and they thought I'd intentionally set them up for failure? I have to go, I said, ending the call. Over the next 2 months, the reports escalated. A commercial airline delayed flights after discovering the new coating was degrading in engine compartments. A Dubai skyscraper halted construction when test panels failed in the desert heat. Class action lawsuits were being discussed. Vanguard's stock dropped 20% in a single day when news broke that the military was canceling orders pending a full investigation. Then came the leaked internal memo. Someone posted it on Reddit, and it spread through industry forums like wildfire. RevX9 Quality Incident Response. From Preston Hale. CEOs to Executive Leadership Team. The preliminary investigation confirms our suspicions. Margaret Blake failed to provide adequate documentation of critical manufacturing parameters, resulting in the current product instability. Legal is preparing a case for breach of contract and potential industrial sabotage. In the meantime, all communication should reference technical refinements rather than product failure. The development team assures me they are 2 to 3 weeks from resolving the issues. I read it twice, not for the accusations, but for the name. Margaret Blake. They didn't even remember what to call me. That night, I checked my employment contract. The non-compete clause expired after 6 months. It had been 6 months and 10 days since I walked out of Vanguard. I made a phone call. Eva, it's Lauren Blake. Dr. Eva Santiago had been my classmate in graduate school before taking a very different path. While I disappeared into the quiet precision of corporate research, she became a vocal advocate for sustainable materials, eventually founding Polaris Advanced, a small but respected research firm specializing in environmentally responsible industrial applications. Lauren Blake, she said, voice warm with surprise. I heard what happened at Vanguard. Their loss? How's Polaris these days? I asked. Growing. We just secured Series B funding. Actually, I've been meaning to call you. We're expanding our thermal management division, and we need someone who understands high-performance coatings. I smiled into the phone. What a coincidence. I happen to know something about that. 2 days later, I was in Eva's Boulder laboratory, signing a contract with terms I'd never been offered at Vanguard. Full creative control, IP sharing rights, and a seat on the executive board. Welcome to the team, Eva said, handing me a lab coat with the Polaris logo. What do you want to tackle first? I looked around the state-of-the-art facility, at the eager faces of scientists half my age who didn't yet know what I could do. I'm thinking of a thermal barrier coating, I said casually. Something that won't burn, won't degrade, and can't be replicated without understanding exactly why it works. Eva raised an eyebrow. Sounds familiar. It won't be, I promised. This will be better, cleaner, without the toxic components that always bothered me, but that Vanguard wouldn't let me eliminate. How long will it take? She asked. I thought about the 23 years I'd spent perfecting VX9, about the knowledge that lived not just in my mind, but in my hands, my instincts. Give me 3 months, I said. It took 2. I named it LX Fusion 91. The L for Lauren, naturally. The 91 for the year I'd first begun working on thermal coatings as a graduate student. The formula contained none of the problematic halogenated compounds that had always troubled my environmental conscience. Instead, it used a nanostructured silicate matrix that I'd theorized years ago, but had never been allowed to fully develop at Vanguard due to initial research costs. The results exceeded even my expectations. LX Fusion 91 withstood temperatures 22% higher than VX9, adhered more completely to diverse substrates, and produced zero toxic fumes when exposed to flame. Most importantly, it cost 17% less to manufacture at scale. While I worked, Vanguard Coatings continued its slow-motion collapse. The stock fell another 30%. Preston Hale appeared before a congressional committee investigating the failure of protective coatings in critical infrastructure. 3 board members resigned. And still, they couldn't figure out how to make VX9 work without me. Eva and I decided to unveil LX Fusion 91 at the International Conference on Advanced Materials in San Francisco. We didn't send out press releases or media alerts. We simply registered for a standard presentation slot on the second day of the conference. When we arrived, I noticed the Vanguard Coatings booth immediately, smaller than in previous years, staffed by nervous-looking sales representatives. Derek Sloan stood among them, dark circles under his eyes, gesturing emphatically to an unconvinced-looking potential client. Our presentation was scheduled for 2:15 p.m. in the main exhibition hall. As Eva introduced me, I scanned the crowd, industry veterans, government procurement officers, and yes, Preston Hale himself, standing at the back with arms crossed. I stepped to the podium. Good afternoon. My name is Lauren Blake. I saw Preston straighten, his expression shifting from boredom to alert concern. For those unfamiliar with my work, I spent 23 years developing VX9, the industry standard in thermal protective coatings. Today, I'm introducing its successor. The demonstration was elegant in its simplicity. 2 identical steel panels, one coated with VX9, the original formula, not the disastrous enhanced version, the other with LX Fusion 91. Both subjected to direct flame from industrial torches. After 60 seconds, we extinguished the flames. The VX9 panel had performed as expected, intact but visibly stressed. The LX Fusion panel looked virtually untouched. LX Fusion 91 is now available for testing and certification. I concluded, and unlike its predecessor, its environmental impact profile meets or exceeds all projected 2030 EPA standards. The room erupted in applause. Eva handed out technical data sheets to the crowd that surged forward. And through it all, I kept my eyes on Preston Hale, who stood frozen at the back of the room, hand pressed to his ear as he listened to someone through his wireless earpiece. I didn't need to hear the conversation to know its content. Vanguard's largest customers were in this room, witnessing a solution to the problem that had been plaguing them for months. Later that evening, at the conference reception, Eva clinked her champagne glass against mine. 14 potential clients, she said, grinning, including Mid-America Defense. Mid-America Defense, Vanguard's largest customer, with contracts worth hundreds of millions. Have you seen the stock ticker? Eva continued, showing me her phone. Vanguard shares had dropped 15% in after-hours trading. It's not about revenge, I said quietly. Eva studied me. Then what is it about Lauren? I considered the question, watching the bubbles rise in my champagne. Recognition, I said finally. Not fame, just acknowledgement that what I created matters, that I matter. Well, Eva said, I'd say mission accomplished. 3 days later, the Wall Street Journal ran a feature story. The Scientist Who Walked Away: How Lauren Blake's Departure Doomed a Corporate Giant. The article detailed Vanguard's catastrophic decision to force out the quiet genius behind their flagship product, followed by their failed attempts to recreate my work. Preston Hale resigned the following week. Vanguard's board announced a strategic reorganization that industry analysts recognized as preparation for eventual sale or dissolution. And me, I received job offers from every major materials company in the sector, all promising creative freedom, executive titles, and compensation packages that made my Vanguard salary look like pocket change. I declined them all. Instead, I accepted the position of Chief Innovation Officer at Polaris Advanced, where my name appeared on the company letterhead and my photograph hung in the lobby alongside Eva's and the other founders. 6 months after the conference, I received a letter. The return address was from a Derek Sloan in Boston. Inside was a single page. Ms. Blake, I thought you should know that Vanguard Coatings is being acquired by Meridian Industrial. The VX9 line has been discontinued entirely. I've accepted a teaching position at MIT. Before leaving, I discovered something in the archives, a paper you wrote in 2009 proposing the silicate matrix structure that I believe forms the basis of your new formula. It was marked not approved for development by the former CFO. They should have listened to you years ago. Respectfully, Derek. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my desk drawer. Then I turned back to my lab bench, where the prototype of a new generation of LX Fusion lay waiting. This version would be even better, even more impossible to replicate without understanding the science and art behind it. Not because I wanted to create another proprietary secret, but because the best innovations aren't just formulas or instructions. They're the culmination of experience, intuition, and the quiet persistence that comes from loving what you do enough to perfect it, even when no one is watching. I didn't need revenge. I just needed to be Lauren Blake, in a place where that name meant something. And this time, no one could erase me. I had already rebuilt myself, stronger than before. The fireproof coating trusted by airlines, skyscrapers, and government bunkers starts with a woman who knows exactly what she's worth. And she never even has to raise her voice to prove it.